The Portal King is Portal Kinging again. And this time the Portal King is Portal Kinging in a way that we used to Portal King. Are you confused? I'll explain.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And more importantly, Ole Miss every day as well. This weekend, our Discord server, we're up over 100 subscribers at this moment, and we are doing it. We are growing so fast. We are going to move our Twitter Spaces to Discord Live on Tuesday. So let the adventure begin. Join the Discord server. That way, whenever this board becomes a private message board, which it will, September 1st, open enrollment only happens in August. You can be there for September 1st when we really start going on the Discord server. We had a pretty interesting, fun juice fest going on, people going back and forth. It was a very interesting thing. So do that. Subscribe to that Discord server and be a part of the community. All right, Ole Miss got a commitment from TJ Dudley, the linebacker that is transferring from Clemson. And Ole Miss got 2 transfer commits over the weekend, but it was transfer commits the way we used to recognize transfer commits. And something happened at Clemson, and he ended up getting dismissed from the team. The last player, by the way, that got dismissed from Clemson was Chad Kelly. But yeah, I mean, if this one works out anywhere as well as Chad Kelly did, we're in for a treat here. But I'm not going to go into the who, what, when, and where, and why, and all that stuff, and why he left Clemson. I'm not going to relitigate that. I'm going to concentrate on what he could bring to the Ole Miss offense. But TJ Dudley did commit this weekend at Juice Fest. He was one of the players that was going around looking at everything that could happen. Now, he is a linebacker that was in line to make a impact for the Clemson Tigers this year before he was removed from that team. So him transferring to Ole Miss is almost probably similar to like when Dwayne Dotson came to Ole Miss as far as the impact that could have on the Ole Miss defense. But he's a really good player. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that everything is honky-dory about this. I'm not going to do that. But I am going to talk about the positives and the what-ifs. Even worst-case scenario, what-ifs. If the worst-case scenario happens, because since he left outside of a transfer portal window, he will have to apply for a waiver. Now, we all know how the NCAA deals with waivers from Ole Miss. We remember Otis Reese being declared eligible for the Egg Bowl in that weird 2020 season. We remember Jacob Springer not becoming eligible at all. And it just happens. They just sat on it. I think there's 2 or 3 basketball players that are undergoing the waiver process at the moment. It just is a weird situation where other schools seem to just rubber stamp get this through. It seems to be a struggle for Ole Miss for whatever reason. I'm not saying there's anything going on, but there might be something going on, if you know what I'm talking about. So Ole Miss is going to have to apply for that. Let's just say the NCAA treats Ole Miss the way they always treat Ole Miss, and they deny that waiver. Well, then the 2024 linebacker room, the leaders to start at that position is a top 250 player in TJ Dudley and Suntarian Perkins. They have a chance to be the one that takes over year 2, the linebacker room. And you also have the other linebackers that we already know about, but those are going to be 2 dominant players that are playing in the second level of that defense. And TJ Dudley is going to get to, reap the benefits of playing beside somebody like Suntarian. TJ Dudley's nickname is the Bull. That tells you he's a little bit of a thumper at the linebacker position. That stylistically works well with Suntarian Perkins as well. So we will see. This is a good pickup. Now, if the waiver happens, he's automatically going to be in here fighting for playing time with the other 5 linebackers. Then you will have a legit 3 deep playing linebacker at Ole Miss instead of a legit 2 deep of 6 linebackers for 2 positions. So we'll see exactly what happens. I'm pretty fired up about TJ Dudley. And real quick, let's look at the highlights of what he can do. This is a good player. He's a thumper. High school highlights. Player out of Montgomery. We've done pretty well out of Montgomery, but you're going to see somebody that made plays in high school. We always talk about how in high school, I always talked about the not wanting a roster before I looked at players on the field. I wanted a player to be obviously the best football player on the field. I want him to stand out. To me, that is one way to tell if somebody is SEC ready. And there's just interceptions all the time. He's always around the football. He's a thumper. He's athletic. I mean, it's pretty good. I mean, he did Dion going into the end zone on a interception. He did run game stuff that was very impressive. So you're looking at somebody that has a chance to really make an impact at the college level at the University of Mississippi. Now, everybody's going to say, well, what if the worst thing happens? Well, what if the worst thing happens to all the players? And there's certain people that just kind of go into that thing. I'm going to assume that it's all going to work out until it doesn't. And if it doesn't work out, he'll get Chris Marshall. And that's just the way that's going to work. But all the talent in the world, this is a dude that deserves a shot. He really deserves a shot. And you can see the way he's playing linebacker. And he's had a year already in a college weight program of exactly how far he can go. So I'm pretty fired up about that. Now, let's go to the other transfer real quick in this first segment. And that is Marquis Willis, who is the brother of Malik Willis, by the way, the backup quarterback of the Titans. Might be third string quarterback, but backup quarterback as well. We'll just say that. We are talking about somebody that's a pretty good football player. But Ole Miss Rebels land commitment from freaky Juco receiver Marquis Willis. He's a big body receiver. He's 6'3", 220. He reportedly ran a sub 4.4 at the Ole Miss camp over the weekend. He played high school football in Roswell, Georgia, and he's coming off of his first season at Kahoma, where he hauled in 20 catches for 281 yards, 4 touchdowns, averaging 14.1 yards per reception. So why would somebody that is freaky have a profile that kind of looks like this? Not many ratings, right? Well, here's the problem. To me, Juco recruiting, the same number of dudes that were in Juco recruiting are in Juco recruiting now. But now, thanks to the transfer portal, they've slid down in the order of importance for people to look at. The understaffed recruiting services, and they are understaffed. Do not hear that they're not. Even at a place like On3, where it's very important, they are understaffed at doing this. And they handle high school recruiting, and they go all out in high school recruiting. They do the best they can at portal recruiting, which that used to be Juco recruiting. And Juco recruiting is kind of overlooked at this moment. Now, when you have a guy like Lane Kiffin, who is going to find talent wherever you can get him. He got up 2 players out of Canada in 2020. So he is going to find players that can play no matter what he does. And these are people that all the coaches laid eyes on. So Marquis Willis, 6'2", this one says 180, the other one says 220, I don't know. But whenever you look at these recruiting services, the info is going to be notoriously wrong. Now, if you look at the highlights of Malik Willis, this is something that is pretty important to see. You see somebody that's just a good player, and you see the quarterback that's generally just not very good. No insult to the quarterback, but this is like a worst case scenario Juco quarterback. I think Marquis Willis actually played a game at quarterback last season. So that's going to account for his numbers, and that's going to account for stuff like that. So what they're doing is looking at this player through the lens of a combine star. This is somebody with a high 40 numbers, long hands, good body control. His highlights flash just enough to where you can see if he's put on the field with somebody that is a really good player, he'd have a chance to really shine. 4'3" at 220 pounds is nothing to sneeze at. So we'll see exactly what happens with Marquis Willis. Again, He's the brother of Malik Willis, the backup quarterback for the Tennessee Titans, and we'll see exactly what happens. Now, the coach is Terrence Metcalf, and you might know that name. And I think Bo Wallace might be an offensive coordinator there. I don't know if he's moved on. I don't know exactly what's happened, but that does seem to be something that could have happened, honestly. So we'll see exactly what will happen with Marquis Willis moving forward. The only thing I know for sure is he's obviously going to be a fan favorite with a last name like that, and everybody's going to love everything he does. I mean, the last one that came through with that name was Patrick Willis, and he served out all right. And then you have me and all of this stuff, and there's just a good last name for Ole Miss sports. So I'm sure Marquis Willis will kind of be a dude. He's at a place where it's a little bit difficult. It's probably the poorest or second poorest junior college in the state of Mississippi. Kahoma, I think they're in Clarksdale. They're just in the heart of the Delta. They have stuff, they do stuff, but it's going to be tough sledding for those guys. But Malik Willis looks like a dude on film. He just looks like a dude. So when we come back, we will get in and show you the updated Manning Center. And holy crap, this thing is beautiful. Anyway, stick around to see that. All right, today's show is brought to you by eBay Motors. For a championship team, it's all about making every player a perfect fit. It's the same whenever it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay's guaranteed fit, you can be sure that every part that you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know if your part will fit or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop at eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices at ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay's guaranteed fit is only available to U.S. customers, eligible items only, exclusions apply. Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. Subscribe there, please. Also, join our Discord server, which will be hosting Twitter Spaces starting this week, starting tomorrow. So join that Discord server as well. We're Ole Miss every day. It's a lifestyle. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Should be a lot of fun. Anyway, Ole Miss with Juice Fest debuted their beautiful new Manning Center. And when I say that, we're going to put up some video that not many people have seen as courtesy of Ole Miss Sports Productions. But this is a interior design that just chef's kiss. Looks so good. And while some schools are going to spend all their money trying to maximize everything, you'll hear of other facilities that might have cost more money. This is good for the NIL brand. Understanding who Ole Miss is, understanding what is important is an important part of the Ole Miss experience. And I think Walker Jones and the Grove Collective and Keith Carter and all of those guys are doing a pretty fantastic job of that. So starting out though, first thing you notice is this thing's huge. This thing's big. And 2 stories on the inside. The locker room is probably the thing that everybody's going to talk about with the zero gravity chairs and all the lights and, the locker arrangement and all of that stuff. Is just a huge space, honestly. They probably doubled the size of the locker room over the last one. But the way they have it set up, it just seems like it's a pretty functional design for the team as well. So we'll see exactly what this does whenever recruits come in and look and seize these facilities, because these facilities will instantly become top half of the SEC. Ole Miss will probably not have tops in the SEC facilities in anything. It's just not the world we live in. We don't have the money to do that. But this is a facility that is going to keep Ole Miss competitive. You look at the weight room, they doubled the size of their weight room. They're maybe tripled it. It's upper deck to where people can watch. All the extra decorative stuff is pretty good. But if you look at all the weights and everything that they have, it's pretty nice that they moved in. All the players can work out quicker. Everything can be a little bit faster because of the expansion of the facility. I mean, it's really, really good news. I like the drone footage that everybody's seen that was on social media over the weekend of them flying in between the racks and all of that and going to the door. That was pretty cool. But if you look down on the weight room, it has a little Walk of Champions decorative area that you can go down and to that overlooks a little bit the weight room to where honestly you can go see exactly what's happening without having to make contact with players and things like that. You can see ladders and all that, and they're still going. There's the team room. That hasn't really changed. That's probably a little bit of the space that I worked in, or a little bit behind it. Most of everything every place I step foot in that building has been torn down, including the spot to make this. But I mean, you'll see what's going on. There's lots of meeting areas, and this is almost like an offense defense looking room, which is important. The linebacker room, you can see that the SIP LB where they have the giant whiteboard and the projector and all that is pretty simple classroom type stuff, but it just looks really good. If you look at the foyer, they've got the Sugar Bowl trophies out front, the first team All-Americans, all of the Hall of Fame members, and very aesthetically pleasing graphics. I think that's important too. Aesthetically pleasing graphics. That is going to be a major thing. But the main thing looking at it, all the amenities that come on, like the juice bar and stuff like that, to where players that are going through the team room and eating on, I don't know, the nutritionist and all of this, whenever they set up a meal plan for each individual player, it becomes a really big deal. But if you look at this is absolutely fantastic. This is the area where coaches' offices used to be. They're not there now. Like the training room is down the road at the moment when this goes on. It's really, really neat stuff. And just looking at all these pictures and everything, this kind of gives you a different view of what is normally shown on this renovation, because we've all seen the drone thing where you flow through and everything was so quickly done. This gives you a little bit quicker or a little bit better look at each individual layer. Like I said, you've got places to sit around, you got places to lounge, all overlooking with balconies, overlooking the indoor. Honestly, that is a thing that Ole Miss should have put into the original whenever it was built. So I'm pretty fired up about exactly what this does. Like I said, when it comes to facilities, it's like, it's not going to get you a kid, but it can lose you a kid. And you want it to be an example of something that you can show off and be proud of. They did a fantastic job with all of the decorative parts of the IPF or Manning Center. And I just think it's really, really going to take off as well. I'm pretty fired up about it, honestly. And obviously, I'm fired up about most everything when it comes to Ole Miss sports, but hey, it is what it is. This team has gotten some things that they can work on. Everybody's talking about recruiting this year and everything. Ole Miss could only recruit to renderings. You couldn't give tours. Whenever you got tours in other places around the conference, whenever people got those, you would have something tangible to compare it to. Ole Miss was meeting in like the in-stadium locker room and stuff as the season progressed. All of this was just a rendering. All of this was just hope. And we all know that renderings do not look like the final project hardly ever when it comes to Ole Miss. Well, this is an exception to where it did. And we will see exactly what happens in recruiting now. If there's a bump, I expect, I don't know, another player to commit this week at least. I think Ole Miss is in the game on a couple of players that they're hoping to flip, and this facility is absolutely going to help that. Anyway, when we come back, we will get into our viewer mail questions of the day as we continue our countdown to camp segment on Locked On Ole Miss. Anyway, stick around. Thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hello, I'm Stephen Willis, and this is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast. We're going to do a little bit of viewer mail. We've been taking questions. We have a whole part of our Discord server where you can just ask questions for the podcast, the things you want us to talk about. And it's just kind of a membership perk that was in there. Well, over the weekend, we had a pretty active input session where people asked multiple questions about Ole Miss and the SEC West. Let's start off with this. Maul 2212. I wanted to ask that after this season, the SEC will add Texas and Oklahoma. Since they are getting rid of divisions and certain teams won't play every year, what new rivalry team will Ole Miss potentially have, or what new team do you think Ole Miss could start a rivalry with? Now, I do not think that necessarily will happen. I do think the three permanent teams will likely be Arkansas, LSU, and Mississippi State. That is going to be Ole Miss's rivalry. But if you bring schools that have a natural affinity to dislike each other into the same area to where you're playing every other year, which could be a possibility now. I mean, it look no farther than Tennessee. For whatever reason, these two fan bases despise each other. And this is even before the Kiffin stuff. The Kiffin stuff just puts gasoline on the fire. But Tennessee fans naturally look down on Ole Miss fans. Ole Miss fans have been enjoying a terrific run, a stretch against them to where Ole Miss hasn't lost a football game against Tennessee since 2010. Now, they haven't played very much, but that's still a long time to look to where, hey, you're not losing that game. So I think once that game becomes every year, you're going to see it ramp up. And it has ramped up, honestly, ever since the Jackson Massacre, ever since, I think Jeff Francis played Ole Miss in Memorial Stadium with Ole Miss the chance to win the SEC in 86 or something like that. You have a situation where a couple years later, the Peyton Manning game and the Mannings with Ole Miss. I think that is probably the rivalry that people, it's not necessarily going to start. It's kind of going to rekindle, in my opinion. Now, I'd appreciate a discussion on why Texas A&M is getting so much love in the preseason. This is from Guyana Observer. If I mispronounced that, I apologize. I think the situation why Texas A&M gets so much discussion during the preseason is the same reason that people have a tendency to go negative with their picks. They always look for the warts. They look for things to go wrong, because 99% of the time you're going to be made to look right, even if you have no idea what you're talking about. You look at Texas A&M, and they have more money than God. You have all the talent in the world. This year, you're supposedly going to have a quarterback. You've added Bobby Petrino. You can see why people looking the outside is like, well, maybe this was the missing piece. Maybe that was the missing piece. But historically, there is no missing piece, because Texas A&M is the only SEC school to not win a national championship in one of the big three sports since 1940. Think about that. So at a certain point, you kind of are what you are. And I don't know if they deserve the hype. I know that people are going to think it's just going to happen, because if you look at the roster and everything that's going on, it should happen. I do think that's also pretty funny. I always say that Texas A&M got so annoying that the SEC went out and got their natural predators in Texas and Oklahoma just to calm them back down. And that should be very interesting. But that is the reason they're getting so much love. I don't think they would be favored to beat Ole Miss at this moment. I don't think they'd be favored to beat LSU, and I don't think they'd be favored to beat Alabama. Would they? Could they? Yeah, probably. But it's like I said during the preview, they have to start beating Mississippi schools consistently before I'll assume they'll start beating Atlanta or Alabama and LSU. Just kind of is what it is. Now, Brendan has this question as well from the Discord server. I would like you to talk about the offensive line leading into camp, especially its depth. Even though we are returning 4 out of 5 starters with a little rearranging, that partially obscures the fact that our starting 5 last year had pretty poor stats, even though we had a pretty potent running game. Do you believe our front 5 played too much last year because due to the fact that there were not enough backups and that were trusted? And do you think the players were picked up in the portal can fix that this year? This is from Brendan. Now, this is an interesting situation, Brendan. Ole Miss run blocks nearly every play, like 95% of the play, they're run blocking, which means it is harder to pass block. If you look at the difference between the two, going back and catching people versus striking people, it's easy to get off of a block when somebody is trying to come towards you and strike you, which means those RPOs have to be relatively quick. So I do think what happened a lot last year was more of the fact of Jackson Dart holding the ball too long and trying to make too many home run type plays, too many hero plays. I don't think it was the offensive line that did that. Now, the offensive line is going to take the blame for it because they're run blocking. But there's so many things that go into pass blocking that people need to understand. It's not just the 5 men up front. There's receivers getting separations, quarterback holding on the ball, depending on where he moves around in the pocket. All of that will make it easier for the offensive line to protect the quarterback. And run blocking each time in those RPOs, which is not going to change. This is going to be a major RPO game, and Lane Kiffin is going to consistently through second and third level RPOs, which means instead of reading the defensive line, which is the first level, you're reading in an RPO a linebacker or a safety. They're going to take a little bit longer to develop. You're going to tempt fate a little bit. I like this offensive line. I like this offensive line a lot. This is a unit that ran for the 3rd most yards in the NCAA last season. So run blocking, they did their job. Pass blocking, I explained to you what was going on. Now, Nick Broker has gone to the NFL, and that is somebody that needs to be replaced. But between Quincy McGee and Victor Kern and Bryson Sanders and those guys that are popping up as well, we had a whole spring without both tackles and in Micah Pettis and Jaden Williams. Whenever you have a situation like that, you can build a little bit of depth. Now, we do not know what John Garrison, that's the other thing in this, what John Garrison is going to view as important. With the first, I forgot his name all of a sudden, the first offensive line coach that came with Jeff Lebby, the Baylor guy that came in, he was very big on size. Ole Miss always recruited very big guys. And that's the reason like players like Micah Pettis got recruited. And he is a mountain of a man right now. He's like 6'8", 360. But then the next offensive line came in and it was a little bit different. And the type of players that he recruited was a little bit different. And he moved on to Auburn and he was kind of encouraged to move on. And John Garrison comes in, who has that Nebraska background that is going to be an important part of this team moving forward, going in to find his guys. And you've seen him bring in players like really good offensive linemen. And he had a ton of success at NC State. But we have to see how he's going to coach these guys and how he's going to figure out how to coach them to make them do a little bit better in the scheme that we currently run. I personally really like this offensive line. I do. But understand that it is never going to be a heavy pass blocking unit simply because they're run blocking nearly every play. And that's not changing. Because the scheme and what makes Ole Miss effective is the RPO plus the tempo. And those plays that will cause Jackson Dart to get hit and make the pass protection look a little bit sloppy are often because he's holding the ball a little bit too long, trying to hit one of those special Lane Kiffin type shot plays. So I think everybody kind of needs to be patient with the offensive line and John Garrison. I do think it's going to be better than it was last year. I do. But understand those things in this offensive system. We've gone over 30 minutes. So I kind of got in the weeds a little bit about offensive line play. But before I get out of here, I do want to let everybody know our Discord server is in open enrollment all month of August. September 1st, it will become invite only, be very exclusive. We are going to move our Twitter spaces there starting Tuesday, and we're going to try and expand this community that is Ole Miss fans and Ole Miss sports. We enjoy this. This is not about my perspective on what's happening. This is about everybody's perspective on what's happening. And this is just another way that you can let your voice be heard. And I'm always on there. I'm always listening. And if you get me to parrot what you're saying, that's a pretty big microphone. So I hope everybody has a good time with that. Anyway, thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. For your second listen, check out Locked On SEC. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, or more importantly, Ole Miss every day, because it's a lifestyle. Anyway, we'll see you tomorrow. Hotty toddy.